Welcome to another edition of We're Not Doing a Podcast. Alongside Mark Weber, I'm Jarrett Least. Now we're doing this episode in the middle of August. Summer is getting close to winding down. Now, a lot of people say, Mark, once the calendar turns to August 1st, they say the summer's over, which is an interesting debate. So I asked you this question. Is the summer over when the calendar turns to August?
Well, you just said it's winding down, so that's implying that it is ending. Here's my take on the situation. Anyone that says summer's halfway over when August hits is an absolute loser. Summer is the best season by far. There is no debate whatsoever. It is summer number one, and then everything else below it. Enjoy it while you can. Don't talk about it being almost over. Don't talk about it winding down. Just enjoy it. Summer ends to me after Labor Day weekend because that's when you really can't pull the whole, oh, I'm going on vacation for a long time. It's summer vacation. August, no one's around pretty much. The entire business world is out during August anyways. August is summer. Unless you live in the South where school is starting, I could kind of see that's where it's ending. But if you're in the Northeast and you're saying summer's over in August, get out of here.
Sometimes you'll get teachers who are getting ready to go back to school. They'll say the summer is over, and I'm in agreement with you 100%. But I'll even extend it even further. I think summer, it ends once the calendar turns to October 1st. September's the best month.
Well, that's the Hamptons mindset because that's when all the businesses in the Hamptons close in October.
Yeah, exactly. You got to savor every last minute while you can. And honestly, the best weather is during the month of September. July was an absolutely brutal month here in New York. But honestly, and I do always agree with you when it comes to summer being the best season. This year, though, considering how bad of summer weather we got, I am excited for the fall. I'm excited for a little more crisp weather. And considering the fact
you say that now until you have to put a jacket on for the first time. Everyone wishes it was cooler. And then once you have to put on that jacket for the first time, that's when you're like, oh, this sucks.
Oh, it's not. I'm not talking about cooler. I'm talking just maybe like a little bit of a sweatshirt. But also considering that we talk about sports, the fact that both New York baseball teams are just really ending their seasons on miserable notes, I am kind of excited a little bit more for the fall, especially with football coming up. And that gets us right into our first topic of the day. Mark, you look like you're already showing signs of misery because you know what I'm about to ask you. The New York Yankees, it was reported by Bob Klapisch that it is in all likelihood Brian Cashman, he's coming on back for another season as the New York Yankees general manager. So, Mark, I asked you this question. What will it take for Brian Cashman to finally no longer be the head man of the New York Yankees?
So Brian Cashman is in year 25 as the Yankees general manager, which is just ridiculous. And if that sounds long or not too long, keep in mind this. There have been 4 general managers in Major League Baseball history that have been the general manager of one team for 25 years. Of those general managers to be with a singular team more than 25 years, the following ended their tenures as general manager. One of them was asked to be a part of a purchase team of another franchise. Another died, and another was near death. That's where it is at for the New York Yankees right now and Brian Cashman.
Honestly, you can compare Brian Cashman to 2 other distinct people in the world. You could basically compare him to Supreme Court justices because they lose their job when they're dead. And you could compare him to the Pope. They lose their job when they're dead. That's basically what is going on.
Recent history, popes have kind of retired and stuff like that. So it's been a little bit different. But even the Pope did retire, not Brian Cashman. Brian Cashman is higher than the Pope
Brian Cashman,
unbelievable.
He has a longer shelf life than some popes. quite frankly, I mean, I feel like there's even been Supreme Court justices who haven't even lasted 25 years on the bench. So when it comes to Brian Cashman, but to answer the question, I think the way to get him fired is there just has to be some sort of major fan protest in the sense of major fire Brian Cashman chants at Yankee Stadium. Or if you go back to many years ago with the New York Jets, when they had John Idzik as their general manager, who was an utter disaster, you had helicopters flying over the Jets practice facility saying, fire John Idzik. I think that's the only way Hal Steinbrenner could even attempt to listen to fan outcry, because he's just so secluded from reality. He sees the fact that Yankee fans come to the stadium in droves. They make a ton of money. He doesn't care. Yes, he'll say he wants to win a championship, but clearly not at any cost. It has to become a point where it is so loud and so obvious that he's left with no choice. So I think, Mark, maybe you should start a petition.
There's one way. You're wrong. It's not that they have to go to the games and boo him. Guess what? Those fans who are going to the games and booing Brian Cashman are paying for their attendance.
Yes.
Hal Steinbrenner just cares about those paying for the attendance. He cares about the moolah. It's all about the money for him. If no one shows up to the games, that solves it. Guess what? If you're going to Yankee Stadium and booing Brian Cashman, you're a sucker. You are paying to go and make Hal Steinbrenner more money. He won't care. Guess what? If you don't go to Yankee games, that is your best way of protesting. And that is the biggest way to really spook Hal Steinbrenner and really make him think, maybe I got to do something so we don't have another Connie Mack situation with the New York Yankees.
Unfortunately, that's just never going to happen, because the Yankees are one of the number one tourist attractions in the entire world. So when you have people who come to visit New York from all over the world, they're going to go to a Yankee game. You see it this year. I mean, last week, and when they had a series against the Houston Astros, going into that series, they were reeling, but the place was completely sold out. You would have thought that the Yankees are playing well and in the middle of a legitimate pennant race, but that's not the case. I really think you just got to have some people fly billboards over Yankee Stadium, or when spring training happens
doesn't matter, because even if you have people flying,
they have to do something.
Hal won't care, because if you're flying billboards across the stadium, people are tuning into TV. They're making money off the television revenue. This is a lose-lose situation unless the fans do not show up at the stadium and do not watch the games. Until then, Brian Cashman is still going to be the Yankees general manager, because nothing will let this man change the situation for the New York Yankees. Absolutely nothing. It's disgusting.
There's part of me that does feel bad for you a little bit, because you've always told me, Mark, since we've been friends, the New York Yankees were the one good thing that was always a constant in my life. And would you say that that's the case anymore? Probably not.
They're still above 500. Since I've been following baseball, I've never seen a Yankee team under 500. How does that make you feel as a lifelong Mets fan, hearing that? I've never seen a Yankees team go under 500. It's just incredible. It's a rarity that I see them miss the playoffs. So they are a constant. They still are over 500 in a loaded AL East division. So they're a constant in that sense. It's seeing them not be a World Series contender, and it not being due to injuries or some plan, and it's just very clear that they just don't care. That's the frustrating part. And that's why it's very hard to justify watching them or going to a lot of games until Brian Cashman is let go, because at least that shows something. That shows some effort and some willingness to change that a lot of major league teams do, except for the New York Yankees, apparently.
I'll get into some positive things that I have to say about the Yankees in a little bit, but you did just bring up my New York Mets, who they'll always make me miserable no matter which way you want to pinpoint it at me. So really not much to look forward to the rest of this season for the New York Mets. But one guy who's definitely been a topic of conversation, that's star first baseman Pete Alonso. He's under contract for the rest of this year and next year. And then after the 2024 season, he'll be a free agent. And there's maybe the possibility this offseason they could look into maybe trading Pete Alonso. Mark, would that be a good idea for the Mets?
Absolutely not. If you asked me yesterday whether or not the Yankees should trade Pete Alonso, I would say yes, because this guy has putting up great numbers with some really, really bad Mets teams over the years. But then I looked up the following when it came to Pete Alonso, and it made me change my mind about this guy. Of Mets in their first 5 seasons, he is third in wins above replacement. This is all time for the Mets. First in home runs, fourth in OPS plus. Of all MLB players in the last 5 years, 23rd in wins above replacement, first in home runs, 10th in OPS plus, and among first basemen in the last 5 seasons, top 5 in wins above replacement, home runs where he's first, obviously, and 4th in OPS plus. You're talking about a top 5 first baseman in baseball, a top 25 offensive player in the sport. Now, I know that age in the future could be somewhat of a concern, but the Mets have Steve Cohen as their owner. The Mets still have assets that are going to be with this team for quite some time, like Francisco Lindor. You can win with the younger players, but you still need the older players and the veterans to really help that team along. The 86 Mets had Keith Hernandez, who was a big part of that franchise, among other veterans, to go along with Doc Gooden and Darryl Strawberry, such as Gary Carter. You need those veterans, and I don't think Pete Alonso would be a concern for the Mets moving forward, because you're talking about a top 5 first baseman in baseball and a top 25 non-pitcher in the league. You absolutely have to sign Pete Alonso, not just for the fans' sake and for their hopes of the future, but because he makes your team that much better.
And as far as the money goes, that's never going to be the concern when it comes to paying guys, thankfully, with Steve Cohen as the owner. But I'm confident that they will get something done, and they definitely have to keep him long-term, because if you lock up Pete Alonso for the next 8-9 years, he will go down as the best offensive player in Mets history. Look, the Mets simply just don't grow power hitters like him on trees. We've seen it so many times throughout the course of their history. They bring up guys and they just simply don't perform. And Pete Alonso, he has done that and then some. He's also great in the community. He's very charitable. He's a homegrown guy. If you're not going to pay Pete Alonso, then what kind of precedent are you setting to other young players that the Mets did just acquire at the trade deadline? You have to sign him long-term, because you want to be a contending team. And the way I look at it from this perspective, a lot of people will say, oh, well, what have the Mets won with Pete Alonso? Well, to answer the question, it's not a whole lot. But look at it from the perspective, I always look at it with the Atlanta Braves. They went through a rebuild when Freddie Freeman was still on that team. And there was some debate back then. Well, the Braves are going through a rebuild. Should they look to move on from Freddie Freeman? He stayed there, and he was part of those tough years. And then as they developed more and more young players, he was the leader of what ultimately became a World Series champion in 2021. Now, by no means am I comparing the Mets to the Atlanta Braves, because...
Or by no means should you really compare Pete Alonso to Freddie Freeman,
No.
who's in the Hall of Fame conversation.
No,
I don't know
of
if
course
Pete
not.
Alonso's there yet, but considering Freddie Freeman's a much better fielder, but
Yeah,
Pete Alonso
no, of
as
course.
one of the best offensive Mets, sure. Yeah, that's easily in the conversation.
Exactly. And I'm not going to compare the Mets organization to the Braves organization, because the Braves organization is absolutely phenomenal as Mark's doing the chop. And the Mets organization is an utter dumpster fire. But you got to keep Pete Alonso. You just can't replace a guy who hits 40 home runs and drives in 100 automatically with his eyes shut every single season. And he plays every single day. Even this year, when he went on the IL, we thought he was going to be out for 3 to 4 weeks. Comes back in 11 days. Pete Alonso has to be a Met for life. And I am confident that Steve Cohen and Billy Epler and hopefully new team president David Stearns get a deal done with Pete Alonso. Now, introducing a new segment that Mark brought up that I think is definitely very exciting.
Excuse me, I brought up every single topic in this podcast except for the Brian Cashman one. So let's not give me credit for just one segment. It should be all. Just throwing that out there for the people when I'm not hosting. That's the amount of work I'm putting in.
Sure. Okay. Thank you for your service, Mark. I appreciate it. But introducing a new segment where a lot of times Mark, he'll always say something negative about the Mets. I usually don't say much negative about the Yankees, but I'll say stuff that's positive about the Yankees. So our new segment is say something nice about the Mets, and I'll say something nice about the Yankees. Mark, what do you have nice to say about the New York Mets? And can you please do it objectively with no sort of condescending smirks? Please just try as you're doing it right now.
All right. So here's this. I'm going to pull some notes to prove my point.
I can't even take
No. This is positive. Remember, it's say something positive about the Mets. Now, remember, we're going to play this the hard way. I'm not going to go, oh, well, they have this prospect who you should have a lot of promise for. No, I'm going to be talking about someone that is currently on the New York Mets major league roster. And surprising is not Pete Alonso, who, Jarrett, for the record, and you could rewind if you weren't sure during the final recording of this, I did say positive things about, but here's another Met that I could also say very positive things about, and that is Francisco Lindor. He leads the Mets in wins above replacement this season, and he is one of the best shortstops in baseball and is proving himself to be worth being the second highest paid shortstop as well. The third highest wins above replacement among all shortstops in the MLB and the highest in the National League. The 11th highest wins above replacement in Major League Baseball. Among shortstops, Jarrett, if you're paying attention still, first in home runs, first in RBI, third in slugging percentage, fourth in OPS. Again, pretty good for the second highest paid shortstop in Major League Baseball. Also, his 4.4 wins above replacement is the highest in the Mets. Pete Alonso, who I said very optimistic things about before, is second with 2.8. Lindor is a top 5 shortstop in baseball. He's been one of the brightest spots for the Mets this season. And Jarrett, I'm going to raise you even higher in this. Given his contract that he has signed, and I know you talked about Pete Alonso being the homegrown talent, I'm going to say this. Francisco Lindor should be the next captain for the New York Mets.
Well, I appreciate you saying that Francisco Lindor is a good player for the New York Mets, but
he's a great player for the New York Mets.
Can you say something positive about the team, the direction of the team, the future of the team?
Whoa. The segment was say something positive about the Mets. I said something positive and that they have
a good player
in baseball who should be their next captain and their first since David Wright in a sport that for some unknown reason does not do the captains as much as they should. Francisco Lindor should be the face of the New York Mets. He kind of is based on the trade deadline and based on the press conferences. They are so lucky to have Francisco Lindor in a Mets uniform right now.
I'm thankful that you acknowledge that the New York Mets have a good baseball player because, well, I mean, better that they have one good baseball player as opposed to 26 shitbags. I mean, yeah, a bad baseball team is going to have a good player. But
and remember, the segment is you have to say something positive about a current player on that roster.
Or the team or the future. See, my positive about the New York Yankees is even if the Yankees don't make the playoffs this year, I'm very confident that even if they do nothing this offseason, which is probably what will happen because Teflon Brian Cashman will be back and he won't do anything because Hal Steinbrenner spent all the money this past offseason on Carlos Rodon and Aaron Judge, they'll still be in a position next year to come back and be a playoff contender. You know why? Because they are the New York Yankees. There is something to be said about putting on those magical pinstripes. And I know a lot of Yankee fans don't like hearing that, but it's true. I always say it from this perspective. If you put the 2023 New York Mets roster on opening day in New York Yankee uniforms, how many games does that team win as New York Yankees? 100, right? Would you agree?
I think if Francisco Lindor was in pinstripes, definitely, because a top five shortstop in baseball, he'd be good for any team, and maybe he would be better for the Yankees. I don't know, but I think he'd be pretty much good anywhere with the numbers that he's having on a team that's been so cursed this season.
But when it comes to the Yankees, yes, it's not a great time right now to be a Yankee fan, and I totally understand why fans are very frustrated with the current state of the team because they don't do whatever it takes to win a World Series, but they're always in a position to be a playoff team. You just can't say that about the New York Mets. In the New York Mets' entire franchise history, they've made the playoffs in consecutive years just twice. They've been in existence for over 60 goddamn years. That's what I always keep talking about when it comes to the Mets, sustainability. It's just never there. And you brought it up earlier with the Yankees. They've missed the playoffs, what, 3 or 4 times in our lifetimes? We're both 31 years old. That's pretty damn good.
So since I've been a regular follower of baseball, which was the 2000 season, the Yankees missed the playoffs during the following: 2008, 2013, 2014, and 2016. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's not so terrible. While I do understand the fact the Yankee fans are frustrated with what's going on right now. So remains to be seen. Doesn't look like the Yankees are going to make the playoffs this year. Doesn't look like the Mets are definitely not making the playoffs this year. That's for certain. But we'll see what happens with both these franchises moving forward. Now, moving on to another interesting topic, who Mark and I are both very big fans of. Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports. He pulled off maybe one of the greatest business deals in the history of business. Several years ago, he sold Barstool Sports to Penn Gaming. And just this week, it was announced he reacquired Barstool Sports 100%. So, Mark, I ask you, how great is it knowing now that Dave Portnoy is back running Barstool Sports again?
I think it's great for one reason and not for why it impacts Barstool Sports. I think it's great because of how it impacts the entire sports world. It could be easily said in the last 8 years that Barstool has been the forefront when it comes to what is next in sports media and where the puck is trending. With Barstool, they were the first in 2020 to truly dive into the sports gambling world, and it did make sense. Sports gambling was a natural part of a lot of their content. A lot of the big-time hosts talk about gambling a lot, and it is a big part of their lives, and it seemed like a good fit. It was then showed in the last few years that it's really hard to be both a media company and a gambling property because of regulators, gaining market share in an overcompetitive field. And hey, people don't really love hearing about other people's bets because it's kind of like hearing about other people's fantasy teams. No one cares unless it's yours. So I think Barstool being able to move away from sports gambling and be able to focus on content and being a lifestyle brand is going to be where a lot of sports media properties are going to try to aim for in the future. And it's ironic that ESPN is now going so hard after gambling when Barstool, which is half the size, if that, knows that that's not really the answer. And it kind of shows how the legacy media brands are struggling against these emerging companies because they're not able to test the waters like a company like Barstool could. And I think this is going to be very interesting for those sports fans who don't really love gambling, aren't into it as much, and don't care about it in their everyday content like you and I going forward, that, hey, sports will be going back to entertainment and not about over and under spreads. Sports will be going back to just being entertainment, and why you and I got into sports in the first place, not because of gambling.
I give you an A on memorizing a very nice PowerPoint presentation. That's basically what that argument felt like, why Dave Portnoy getting back Barstool is a good idea. So I commend you for that. But to answer the question, it's fantastic because there's no more regulators. Barstool can go back to being what Barstool was in the very beginning. Anyone can say whatever the hell they want to say. Of course, you can't say crazy offensive stuff. But it was funny how first order of business, Dave, he brings back Mincy. He goes back into the office. He sees no one in the office, and he's just talking about how all of his employees are brain dead. Like, you got a new boss back in town again, and literally no one's showing up. And then today he's posting as each employee is clocking in. But of course, legend, Frank the Tank, he walks into the office at 11:05 like he owns the place. So I always said it to you in the past. If Dave Portnoy, he hands the reins over to someone at Barstool, should be Frank the Tank. Because
not Big Cat.
What's that?
Not Big Cat, who already has his own Chicago office and a lot of equity in the company.
Well, you and I had this debate where I think we could bring it up right now. Who do you think is a more recognizable Barstool personality outside of Dave Portnoy? Is it Big Cat or is it Frank the Tank? Because
it's usually Big Cat.
I think it's Frank the Tank.
It's Big Cat. Big Cat has 1 million followers on Twitter at this point.
Twitter.
Frank is big in a Twitter circle and in baseball circles. Big Cat's big among football circles, pop culture circles. Big Cat's a bigger deal than Frank the Tank. It's reality. He has twice the amount of followers on social media as him. Big Cat is a national brand. Honestly, in your world, Frank the Tank may be bigger. For most people, they're going to know Big Cat over Frank the Tank.
I don't really think when Big Cat goes to a sporting event, he has security escort him when Frank the Tank did a Yankee Stadium. And also when Patrick Beverly walked into the Barstool offices, he literally went up to Frank the Tank as if he was meeting a celebrity. It was just, I think Frank the Tank, he's more recognizable than Big Cat. Unfortunately, due to difficult circumstances for Frank the Tank, but he is more recognizable. But going back to Dave, it's great for the company because they could just do whatever they want now. And there's nobody overlooking their shoulder. He doesn't feel like he has to fire anybody if this regulator saying, you got to can this guy, and he probably won't have to fire Francis again or Mincy. They can just do what they want to do. And
Francis thing was a little different. Francis made a joke about a woman who was murdered and call her daddy jokes in a blog. I think under any circumstances, that was also pre-Penn. Remember that too.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. But look, it's good to know that Dave is back. And the other thing about him is now knowing he's running the show again, he's the king of content. He always comes up with something new and creative. And the fact that he's back in charge, it's going to be great to see how Barstool continues to move forward, as if it's not the biggest sports media company in the country right now. But now moving on to our favorite segment, With It or Not With It. There's been a couple of documentaries that have been new to the airwaves over the past several days, starting with HardKnocks, that's following training camp with our New York Jets, which has been an interesting watch. And then there's this also new documentary that a lot of people are talking about, and that is Untold with Johnny Manziel. He has certainly had a lot to say so far in his new documentary. So, Mark, I ask you, which documentary is more with it? HardKnocks with the Jets or Untold with Johnny Manziel?
This is what I love about you when you ask questions, Jared, is you'll ask a question, but you'll answer it within your question, thus making it obvious for someone like myself to answer it. You just said it. which is the one that everyone's talking about on social media, whether or not they're a football fan? The Johnny Manziel documentary. If you have a Netflix account, you're going to see it. And the story of Johnny Manziel is fascinating, even if you're not a football fan. It is 100% the Johnny Manziel documentary. No debate about it.
It's definitely Johnny Manziel because, I mean, he's talking about how he was watching zero film when he was in the NFL and how they were doing fake drug tests. And also,
did you see it yet? Did you watch it?
I have not watched yet. I did watch, of course, the first episode of HardKnocks, but it's just been such a buzz about all of the things with Johnny Manziel. And then they were also talking about how he didn't really come from oil money. And
that was a shock. What a Heisman class between Manti Te'o and him. I mean, what happened to journalism? They didn't. No one fact checked anything. No one fact checked if Manti Te'o had a girlfriend, and no one fact checked if Johnny Manziel did come from oil money. What a Heisman race in 2012.
Yeah, seriously. That could be a 30 for 30 in itself. Who has more of a real life, Johnny Manziel or Manti Te'o? I would tune in for that shit. That would be certainly interesting to watch. But you know, going to HardKnocks, there was one great moment when Jeff Ulbrich, the defensive coordinator, was going over film with his defense, basically saying how only Aaron Rodgers could complete a certain throw. That really got me excited, but it was a good episode. But I am much more intrigued to watch the Johnny Manziel documentary. That is definitely something that
I watched both of them back to back last night. And I'll say this, the Jets Hard Knocks episode 1 was a complete snooze fest compared to the Johnny Manziel doc. My one complaint with the Johnny Manziel documentary is that it should have been split into 2. It should have started with his childhood and then going into the 2013 season, which was his last college football season, starting with the 2013 season and then going to where he is now. They kind of smushed it all together, but definitely a lot more interesting every minute compared to Hard Knocks episode 1.
And by the way, not to digress even more, but you know, the Johnny Manziel documentaries on Netflix. I went onto Netflix the other day. They made me create a new account because of the whole family sharing thing. It's just total bullshit. Honestly, every single streaming service is trying to scam you one way or another. It's just ridiculous. Am I the only one who feels this way, Mark? Because
everyone's going up $3 more a month, and
what?
Disney announced that they're losing subscribers. So we're losing business.
Bullshit.
What do we do to increase business? Raise it $3 a month more. That makes absolutely no sense. Maybe it's because we're all addicted to the next show that could potentially come out on Hulu, or the current show we're watching on Hulu, or the current movies that could be going on Hulu in the near future. But that just makes no sense from a business standpoint, especially it's the streaming wars. It's not, hey, the frolic of the streamers where pick whatever you want. This is a battle between all these companies. You're going to raise prices as you're losing business? Jared, you're a businessman. That makes no sense.
Of course it makes no sense. But you know what? These streaming services, they never want to make sense. And quite frankly, they can all just go fuck themselves.
Advertising is going to help it. Once these companies figure out how advertisers could monetize their brands in the content and within shows, that will stabilize prices and make it a more affordable and more viewable experience going forward. Hopefully they lower the prices. Netflix figured out the ad tier, which lowered the prices. Hopefully Hulu sticks with it, and hopefully Hulu may have to drop the prices at a certain point if everyone just stops subscribing, which could happen.
Yeah,
and especially if with the writer's strike, if nothing's coming in the near future, people may have no choice because nothing new is going to be coming on.
Yeah, it's just with Hulu, with paying for a streaming service and with the ads, quite frankly, all of them are just a big crock of shit. But you know what's not a big crock of shit? This podcast, we're not doing a podcast with Mark Weber. Jared Lee signing off. That's all the time we have. We'll see you next week.